So hello and welcome to Wednesday's weekly bite-sized briefing webinar, a collaboration between Action Together, the voluntary community and faith sector and the public sector. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this episode of our Domestic Abuse Awareness series. Action Together is working with Oldham Council to host a series of sessions about domestic abuse. This is our fourth and final session in the series. The last three sessions can be found on our YouTube channel. All sessions are being delivered by Kate Clark, an IDVA from Oldham Council, and today she'll be talking about safety planning. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to hand you over to Kate, who will be taking us from here. Over to you, Kate.
Oh, thank you very much, and welcome everybody to the fourth and final session in the domestic abuse series. So as just mentioned, we are going to be discussing safety planning today. So I'm just going to share with you the presentation. Okay, hopefully we can all see that. So, safety planning for victims of domestic abuse. So, what is safety planning and why is it important to complete a safety plan? Well, basically, safety planning is an individual personalised plan for any individual who is struggling with domestic abuse, and it looks at trying to reduce risk and keep that person safe. So when we're doing safety planning with people, whether they're still in the relationship, whether they've moved on from the relationship, depending on what's happening for that person at the time, we might look at different scenarios, such as issues they might have at work, issues in the home, socializing. We talk about every aspect of that person's life, look at different scenarios and talk about different ways we can keep that person safe. So what I'm going to do a little bit later on is talk about some of the things we can do to support and what we might include in a plan. So what we need to think about, so we need to think about our environment, our surroundings. So if someone's disclosed domestic abuse, obviously one of the main things we could do to help that person is referring to our service for support. Contact details will be at the end. But if you've got time and you've got the resources and you're able to, it's always really useful and valuable for that person to perhaps give some immediate safety planning. Because obviously the sooner we give them that information, the sooner they can help support themselves to keep safe. So not every person will want to be in the home to do this. Not every person will be safe in the home. I've met people in lots of different locations. Sometimes that is in the home. Sometimes that's been in the local park, a local children's centre. We've even been to GP appointments, especially if you've got quite a controlling perpetrator who might monitor the whereabouts of the partner. We look at inventive ways to have that chat with the person just to make sure they're absolutely safe when we're giving them this information. So if you are starting things like a safety plan and they are in the relationship, still continuing that relationship, it's important to think about, where is that perpetrator right now? Are they at work? Are they due back? How much time do I have to speak to this person realistically in a safe way? It's all well and good completing a safety plan, and we do actually, just to mention, we do have quite a good generic safety plan that I can send out along with the presentation to be distributed, which is really useful to pass on to people. However, where will that person put the safety plan? So if that person is separated from their abuser, it might be that they can have a hard copy of the safety plan hidden in the property. It might be that they've got a safe email address. One lady I sent the plan to recently actually works in a school, and it was safe for me to send that to a work email address rather than a personal one. However, if you are completing safety planning with somebody who is still in an abusive relationship, the last thing you want to be doing is handing them a plan to hide in the house and for that to be found. In the same way, if emails are monitored, you've got to think about, is it safe for me to be sending this via email? Having that chat is the best way forward, just to see what the best thing is to do. In some cases where it's not safe to provide the safety plan in any way, shape or form via email or a hard copy, I think the best and safest thing to do is when you are speaking to that person is just to keep reiterating what's on the plan, keep going over it so they've got that in the mind. Is the time appropriate? When we first contact the client, when we first come face to face, or if you're on the phone and domestic abuse is being discussed, it might be a good idea to ask, when is a safe time to speak to you? When we're having conversations with domestic abuse victims, that's the first thing we will ask. Is this a good time to call? Is there a time that's not safe to call? Are you safe now? Are you on your own? Because obviously there might be certain times of the day where they are more at risk if that perpetrator is due to come home. If there's been domestic abuse disclosed, I always put this on here, and I've talked about this in the other 3 sessions that I've done online. Are there any safeguarding referrals that need considering at this point? Has there been domestic abuse disclosed? Has there been any contact with children's social care? If not, and they're being exposed to that abuse, then obviously we need to be contacting the relevant agencies. And if anyone needs support and guidance on doing that, then obviously you can phone our team and we're happy to talk that through for you. So, how to approach a safety plan and discussion. So it's important that that person fully understands what the safety plan is, why it's being implemented. Let that person know you're prepared to listen when they are ready, that you're not going to judge regardless of the situation. Relay any key points. So anything they've mentioned to you that you think significant, make sure you're repeating that back so that person is aware that you're actively listening to that conversation and you're taking it seriously. As I always say, never criticise the abuser, because that might just put the barriers up. Initially, when people get into relationships, often it can take time before that person's true colours come out. You know, sometimes changes are very subtle. That person might have loved that person at one time. They might still be hoping they'll change. There's lots of reasons why people remain in a relationship, not just because of fear, which is obviously a main thing as well. But so sometimes they've got a feeling of worthlessness. They think that, you know, if you're led to believe you're worthless and this is all your fault, then all the blame's at your door and you think you're the problem, not the other way around. So the last thing you want to be doing is making attempts to criticise that person, because, you know, more than likely you're not going to get much information. Always provide safe choices. So last week, I think on week 2 as well, I discussed lots of options around if people need to flee. Oldham Council are the people to go to in terms of first choice housing, who provide B&Bs and emergency accommodation for anybody needing to flee there and then. Obviously, we can support with things like refuge spaces. If you're coming into contact with somebody who wants to leave the house there and then, there's always something that can be done. So probably our IDVA number is the best point of contact for that, just to get some advice. But one thing we will never ever do is pressurise that person to leave. It's always individual choice. It's not refuge, isn't always the best option for everybody. Some people opt to remain in the homes, and then we look at what we can do to make that a little bit safer for that person day to day. So just talking about the fact that we would never pressurise anyone to leave, I think this is an important time to note that when a person is at the point where they feel they want to leave the relationship, it is in fact the most dangerous time for a victim. The danger is absolutely 100% real. 75% of domestic violence related homicides occur after separation, because you'll find that the power and control that the abuser has exerted in the relationship is no more because that person's chosen to leave. So you'll often find that people up the ante. They might be coming to the new address, even encroaching on the place of work. It's a really unsafe. You'll find, you know, lots of people are constantly looking over the shoulder, not knowing what's around the corner. It's a very, very frightening time for anybody leaving a relationship. And as I've mentioned, it threatens the power and control that partner's established in that relationship. So what to include in the safety plan? Can just see the top of there. So it's important to note that it might seem really straightforward and really simple, and you think, my God, that's obvious. But encouraging people to memorize numbers, friends and family, because sometimes during altercations you might find that phones are damaged, phones are taken off that person. So having a couple of numbers to hand that they can ring in an emergency that they've got on the top of the head is usually a really, really good idea. I always say that one of the first things I always say to people is, if you're in an emergency, what are you going to do? And the answer 99% of the time is ring the police. Well, that's all well and good. Absolutely. Of course, ring the police if you're in an emergency. That's what we encourage anybody to do. But there are times when that might not be possible because, as I've mentioned, the phone might be damaged. If you're stood face to face with somebody, a perpetrator, and they're aware that you're about to phone the police, odds are they're going to try and stop you from doing that. So the safety plan is really just a plan B. What do I do in a situation if I can get the police here? Keep your phone charged at all times. Again, quite obvious, but just a reminder of people that they need to have that phone with them. Silent solutions. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that before. So if you ring 999 and that perpetrator is stood in front of you, and you might be thinking, as soon as I ask for police, this is going to escalate the situation and put myself at massive risk. As soon as you are connected, if you dial 55, that will alert the operator to the fact that you do need help, but you can't speak, and then they can locate you from the GPS. It's just quite a good way, really, of not further escalating that risk. So think about safe rooms in the house. I would always say, if possible, obviously get out of the house. That's your best bet. But if you are unable to, for whatever reason, if your exit is blocked, think about safe rooms in the house you can potentially go to. Avoid anywhere where there's added danger, i.e. kitchens where there are knives, stairways, bathrooms where there's running water. Some people that we've worked with in the past, when we've been looking at security for the property, have added bolts on the bedroom doors. So if they are able to get themselves to the bedroom, it can serve as a bit of a safe room, really, if they're not able to get out of the property. Ensure important documents such as passports and birth certificates are in easy reach. If somebody is in a relationship and is thinking of leaving that relationship in a safe way and moving elsewhere, especially if they are taking up emergency accommodation and they do that through Oldham Council, you will find that the first thing they will ask for is things like the documents and any birth certificates for children and birth certificates for themselves. And what I'm not saying is pack that bag, put it obviously in the middle of the room, because obviously you'd never do that, would you? But if someone said to me now, where's your child's birth certificate? I'd be able to find it, but it might take me a good hour and a half of rummaging through the sideboard trying to remember which drawer it's in. So just to have a mental note of where these things are, should you need them in a hurry, is a really good habit to get into. Okay, so discuss what platforms, when is a safe time to make contact. Discuss some of the platforms that might be easier to use, especially if you're working with some younger people. Not everybody is comfortable on the telephone. Not everybody is safe on the telephone. As I mentioned, the lady where I emailed the safety plan, she used to converse with me over email as well, because that was her safe place at work and it was much easier to do that. Some of the younger people I work with prefer WhatsApp. There's lots and lots of different ways of communicating with people, and it's best to establish that on the first meeting. So having a code word is really useful as well. So as I mentioned, police is always your best bet in an emergency. However, if that's not possible, it might be, you think you're going to be at massive risk. contacting the police, you've not been able to do silent solutions, having a bit of a code word. So you could phone somebody up, or if that's not safe, just send them a message on the phone. If you use a specific word or even an emoji, that can mean, get the police to my house immediately. So it sort of puts the onus on someone else to ring the police to your address if you think you're going to struggle to do that. So always have your plan B, your plan C, whatever you need. If there's other professionals that are already working with that person, discuss if they have planned contact, who is most likely to be able to raise that alarm and implement that code word if an emergency situation should arise. Thinking about some of the problems we have when people are in the relationship and when they've left the relationship. We've had various situations. I'll go into digital abuse in a moment, but where we've had trackers on cars and things. It's surprising how abusers the lengths they will go to really to control every aspect of the partner's life. It's really quite frightening. Thinking about local community neighbourhood officers or health visitors, if there's young children in the property, that could be a source of contact. Especially people like health visitors, where it wouldn't be unusual for them to be contacting the family, because they would do that routinely as part of the job anyway. Any contact we could have from professionals that won't arouse suspicion is quite useful to be discussing that, and discuss whether they're able to have regular contact with that person. Scenario planning, I would say, whereas we always encourage people, don't we, sort of, when you've got younger children, we'll look at fire escape plans and what do we do in the event of a fire. Well, to me, if there's domestic abuse in a household, it's just as important to go through scenarios of what might we do in the event of any emergency in the house. Have we got a plan of action? And that's something I'm going to come on to in a moment as well. If we've got young children, or children of a certain age where they might be able to understand what to do in an emergency, it's important that we're talking that through, and everyone is fully on board with what do we need to do in the event that something should happen. So looking at some digital abuse as well, there's various ways that people can be stalked and harassed, especially once a relationship is ended, and that power and control has gone from the household. You will find that can continue in lots of different ways. We have people who are constantly harassed via text, phone calls, social media now is absolutely massive. There's so many different apps and things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's absolutely everywhere at the moment. There's so many different ways you can be hounded and controlled by people in different ways. So I know a lot of people have access to the social media platforms, especially if people are on things like Facebook, Instagram. What I would say is you've got every right to be on there. It's not for me to dictate if you should have a Facebook account or not. But what you need to be aware of is your privacy setting, who is looking at your information. And it's fine, if you're going on your family day out to put your pictures on. I'm sure we all do that. We like to share what we've been doing. But sometimes, as I discuss with, especially some of the younger clients I see, you'll find that they go on a night out and you can track every single place they've been, just going on Facebook, we're at this bar, we're at such a place, we're at such a place. And it gives you almost a map from start to finish what that person is doing on a night out. So if you were a perpetrator and you wanted to cause problems for that person, you could quite easily log on there and find out exactly where that person is. So it's the same thing with pictures. By all means, put your pictures on, but perhaps don't put them on the same day. If you've been to sunny Blackpool, I don't know, for a day out, maybe be waiting a couple of days before you upload that, so you're not putting yourself at risk and exposing your location to anybody. I think is quite a big one. So as I've mentioned, change online passwords. turn off GPS. I know with nearly every single app you go on now, it asks you about location services. Can we track your location? So God forbid there's any sort of tracker being put on that mobile phone. I think the safest thing to do is if you're worried, you can take that to your mobile phone provider, walk into a shop. They will be able to support you to see if there's anything amiss on that phone. But keep your location services absolutely turned off. Turn your Bluetooth off, just to make sure that nobody's tracking you via that means, because there's lots of different spying software that you can add to mobile phones and different devices nowadays to keep tabs on that person. We've had things put on mobile phones which monitor phone calls. Even it's not just location. People can get access to text messages off that individual's phone. As technology develops, it really is quite frightening how much control somebody can have even once that relationship is ended. Think about setting up things like new email accounts, making sure that your passwords are changed, as I've mentioned, around the social media, checking your privacy settings. I would also be changing any passwords on them networks as well, just to keep your accounts absolutely as private and confidential as they can be. And I did mention you can get your devices checked for potential spyware. As again, go into the car dealership if you're worried. I know, people have said to me, I feel like an absolute, really paranoid. I've gone into my car dealership and said, I think there's a tracker on my car, but you know what? If it keeps you safe, absolutely do it. Because it really is more common than you think. So safety planning for children and young people. And we've got to be realistic here, obviously. When we're talking about very young children, they're not going to understand what's going on, and they won't have a clue what to do in the event of an emergency. We're talking about children who are of a reasonable age to understand a safety plan, probably a similar age to a child who could follow a plan of action in the event of a fire. If you feel that they've got that level of understanding, absolutely teach them to phone 999 in an emergency. I mean, I'm not saying sit down and talk about the ins and outs of the domestic abuse. Absolutely not. As children shouldn't be protectors for the parents. But what you can do is teach them to phone 999 and get help if they are able to do so. Always, if you can, if there's anything like civil orders in place, I'm not sure how many people have heard of things like non-molestation orders, which do work in a very similar way to a restraining order, where it's a civil order you can get that prevents that person coming to your home, from contacting you. We can even add children on there to stop the perpetrator coming to the school. And if you speak to somebody who has got that order in place, make sure that the school, for example, has got a copy of that order. Place of work, it's useful to have a copy of that order as well. Just make sure the school are informed, and actually that person should not be attempting to come and have contact with the children or pick them up from school. So practice getting out of the house, because I would always advise getting out of the house rather than not in the event of an emergency. If that's not possible, as I've mentioned, and you have identified a safe room, practice going to that safe room. We're not trying to scare that child to death. We're just using language, simple language, like we're going to plan what to do in an emergency. It's not scary, just as you would do with a fire. In the event of emergency, this is what we do, and keep it really simple. This is our safe room. This is how you ring 999. But make absolutely sure, and I can't stress this enough, that make sure children are aware that it's absolutely not their job to keep the peace. We're just supporting that they know in an emergency that they can help to keep themselves safe. So just a little quiz. You might not be able to see that now because it's so small. I know it's only a little thumbnail, but I don't know if anyone can spot the difference between these two pictures. Well, it's very, very subtle. So I'll give you about 10 seconds, then I'll reveal what it is.
Is it the book at the top? One's
Yeah.
red, one's black.
Yeah, it is, yeah. But as far as I'm aware, that's the only difference on that picture. So when you're looking at that, you think these are very, very two similar pictures here, and there's just a very subtle difference, which, as you quite rightly spotted, is the book in the corner there. But it just brings me on to the point I'm making, that when you're considering safety plans, no two plans are ever the same. So you might be talking about somebody one week, and then you might be talking about somebody the next week who seem to have very, very similar situations going on. We always have the clients, don't we, where we think, oh yeah, that sounds similar to someone I've worked with before. But their situations will never be identical. So it's important to remember that, okay, we might have a generic safety plan, but it's very, very important that we personalize that plan, because they might have similar stories, they might have similar experiences, but one may work, one may have issues going on at work, the other one might not. You will find that during conversations, when you're exploring more, there will be subtle differences, even if they sound the same, and to make sure we're responding to that individual risk and not just thinking to ourselves, well, I've dealt with this before, so I'm going to deal with it in the same way. We're making sure we really, really get to the ins and outs of that person's problem and hearing their story. Because more than anything, it's really important that that person's voice is heard, and we're not just thinking, well, dealt with Jane last week, I'll just send her the same plan. So getting it right first time. So the impact of domestic abuse on a victim and children is severe and very, very long lasting. On average, families live with domestic abuse far too long. Getting effective help, on average, it can be sometimes 2 or 3 years of abuse before that person will ever seek support. I know I've spoken previously about us as IDVAs, where time and time again, you are seeing the same names come up on those referrals constantly. You think, oh, it's such a body again. But you've got to consider, when that person's come through the first time, the second time, the third, even the fourth time, they may not be ready to leave that relationship. So all we can do is offer that support and keep on offering that support, because you may just phone on the 5th time and that person thinks, yeah, I can't stand this anymore, I need your help, which is ultimately why we do what we do. Cutting the time it takes to find and help victims and the families is critical to stop murder, serious injury, and people enduring harm. Again, when I've talked about what I do as an IDVA, currently we do only take high risk referrals, and we're getting an awful lot coming through our service on a daily basis. And when I talk about high risk, we really are up there in terms of severity. We're talking about people who are at risk of serious harm or death. So it really is quite serious, and that number is going up year on year, unfortunately. So one thing I always mention is the one chance rule, especially in the cases of honour-based violence, for example, where there's multiple perpetrators, or if you're in a very controlling relationship, as some people are, where they're not allowed to go to appointments on their own, they're not allowed to leave the house on their own, you've got someone controlling every aspect of your life, you've got to consider that that person may only have the one chance to disclose that they are victims of domestic abuse. So if that disclosure comes to you, that you know what to do with it, and the main thing is that it's taken seriously. So obviously we can use the tools to do a little bit of a safety plan, give us a ring, talk things over with us, get a time off them. If you can't talk for long now, is there a time where, the other half's at work, for example, that I can give you a ring again? Try and get as much information as possible at the time. So just thinking about some of the things, just to summarize it now, when a person has separated from that relationship, just thinking about some of the things we can do to protect that person once they've left, as well as the things we would include in the safety plan, which I've just mentioned. We will talk about things like avoiding shops, banks, cafes where you may have visited on a regular basis with your partner. which is not a nice thing, is it? You know, I'm not saying don't go to these places, but be mindful if you've got into a bit of a routine with things. It may be a risk that person is potentially lurking about. Think about any regular appointments that your partner might know about. I had a lady recently who was having dialysis for kidney failure. So that person, that victim, was at the same hospital and went in every week at the same day and the same time. So obviously that ex-partner was aware when and what time she would be at the hospital. So in the end, we arranged for her care to go to a different hospital just to ensure she couldn't be found and that she would be safe. Thinking about safe routes. So if you're walking these kids to school every morning, are the different routes you can take so your route doesn't become predictable? Think about, you know, do you leave the house at the same time every day? Do you come home at the same time every day? Can you talk to your manager if you're working about maybe switching around some of the times you work, even if you're changing it daily by 5-10 minutes, just so that predictability is cancelled out. And you'll find that a lot of organisations as well, if people work, do have their own policies on safeguarding in the event of domestic abuse. So again, as I've mentioned, providing any copies of orders to work and school, thinking about digital abuse, what we can do to get our phones checked if we think they're being tracked, turning off your GPS as mentioned, changing passwords. Have you got any joint bank accounts we need to consider? Changing online passwords for those, having conversations in store with the bank. And there are ways as well to join the electoral register anonymously as well. So personal addresses and information can't be tracked easily, especially if you have moved. So what I will do at the end of this, and we're coming to the end now, is I will provide the presentation to Rebecca to be distributed, and I can also provide a generic plan. I know I've just talked about, you know, quite a lot, quite stressed that it's, you know, every individual is different, but it's really good to have that generic plan just so you're able to just give some really general guidance, tips and advice on the spot. So if that is then referred to us as IDVAs, what we would do is we would go over that basic plan and then we would personalise that plan for each person we were working at. But just even to give some of the basic, you know, some people don't realise you can phone the police and dial 555 silent solutions, for example, and just anything you can do, any advice you can give. It might only be one thing you remember, but that could be the one thing that saves that person's life. So I'd say anything you can give is absolutely beneficial. And then you will see, I won't go through these now, but I will show you on the presentation, there's some guidance and resources, some helpful information, some helpful websites, which give you additional information about seeking support. I will just mention this one, the Paladin National Stalking Helpline. So if anybody feels like they've been stalked and harassed, you know, if someone's telling you they've split from a relationship, and I'm having, you know, we had one poor person who was receiving about 200 phone calls a day and texts. It was just getting ridiculous. So that's when risk is massively increasing for me. So Paladin are a specialist in stalking and harassment, and we will often refer to them by going on the website to get some additional support for that person. There's different apps you can download, Bright Sky, for example. It comes up like, on the smartphones, you get your weather app, don't you? It comes up like a weather app, and you go on it and it does come up like the weather. And there's a certain part of the app you tap on, which unlocks basically all these different things where you can get contact numbers for advice. It even gives you access to a little journal, especially in the case of stalking and harassment. It's very important to keep a log of everything that's going on for you, just in case you need, you know, go down the road of criminal proceedings and to get orders. You can secretly log all the information so it can't be found by the perpetrator, which I think is really useful. But if you just type Bright Sky into Google, it will give you all that information and lots of the features and functions of the app. And the other thing I will mention just before I come back to ours is that if owning a pet, which can be a barrier to people leaving relationships, because lots of refugees, well, most refugees in my experience won't take pets, neither will emergency accommodation providers like B&Bs. If that's going to stop somebody accessing safe accommodation, these are just some links of people who offer pet fostering services. We've used Dogs Trust before, who are really good. So that animal, dog, cat, whatever it might be, can go into foster placement for a set period of time, just while they're moved on to more permanent accommodation. And it's not easy, but, you know, realistically, it could be the difference between a person and moving or not. And last but not least is our contact details. I hope you can see that at the moment. But yeah, so that's our number, our main duty line. So that's Monday to Friday, 9 till 4. You can get hold of an IDVA, who can give you advice, support, what to do if you come across a disclosure, or you can email our central address, which is up there as well. So that's all from me today. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me. And if anyone has any questions, I am more than happy to just stay and answer those. Well, thank you very much.